Welcome to Football's Golden Oldies from the Tull House in Lancaster. Can I just ask you to subscribe and hit the notification button? Thank you. Officer Tull, reporting for duty, sir. Very good, Tull. Stand at ease. Now listen here. This is your first mission, and it's not an easy one, I'm afraid. We need you to take your men to Hill 67 and capture it from the Germans. Your king and country are relying on you. Don't let them down. That's all. Thank you, General. After his briefing, Walter laid back on his bunk and thought about how far he'd come from the children's home in East London, where he'd grown up after his parents died. At 28 years old, Walter was the first black soldier to become an infantry officer in the British Army. He travelled to faraway places like Argentina and Italy, and now he was fighting in France. If only his family could see him now. And the two drawings tell the story. Where did his story begin? Walter Tull's grandmother, Anna, had been born a slave in Barbados in the Caribbean. After the abolition of slavery in the Caribbean in 1833, Daniel Tull, Walter's father, was born. When he left school, Daniel Tull started work as an apprentice carpenter, earning sixpence a week. In the summer of 1876, Daniel heard that a ship sailing to England needed a carpenter, so he joined the crew. When the ship docked in Folkestone, Daniel decided to stay and find work. The Palmers enter the picture. Alice Palmer grew up in Folkestone in a poor family, most of whom worked on the land for local farmers. There weren't many black people living in Folkestone, but as Daniel had a trade and he had taught himself to read and write, he found regular work. Daniel went to the Methodist chapel on Sundays, which is where he met Alice. In 1881, Alice and Daniel were married, and Alice's family were very happy to have Daniel as their new son-in-law, and Alice's mother wrote to Daniel welcoming him into the family. The two photographs of typical farmland in the 1880s. Edward and Walter arrive in London. Daniel and Alice had 6 children: Bertha, William, Cecilia, Edward, Walter and Elsie, and they all lived at 51 Walton Road in Folkestone. Walter and his brothers attended North Board Elementary School. When Walter was 5 years old, his mother died with cancer. Daniel met Clara, Alice's niece, and they married in October 17, 1896. Then, on December 10th, 1897, Daniel died from heart disease. Clara could not afford to look after all the children, so Walter and Edward were sent to Bonner Road Children's Home in East London. Walter was 8 years old. Football comes into Walter's life. By the time he was 16, Walter had been playing for the orphanage football team for a few years, as well as training as a printer in the workshops of the orphanage. He had become a very good player and was invited for a trial with a local amateur team, Clapton. The trial went well and Walter joined the team, being described by the Football Star newspaper as having clever footwork. Walter scored many goals, and Clapton progressed to the FA Amateur Challenge Cup final where they beat a team from the Northern League, Eston United, 6-0, which was a record score. Turning professional. Clapton reached the final of the London Senior Cup and then the London County Amateur Cup, winning both. The Football Star newspaper described Walter as Clapton's catch of the season, and scouts from the professional clubs were queuing up to sign him. Tottenham Hotspur, then the richest team in London, invited Walter to play for the reserves against Clapton Orient and were so impressed they signed him immediately after the game. He had finished his apprenticeship as a printer and signed for Spurs for £4 a week, the maximum wage, plus a £10 signing on fee. First Division Spurs played in front of crowds of 15,000, more than 5 times bigger than the ones who watched Clapton at the old Spotted Dog ground in Upton Lane. Walter never played on a losing team at Clapton. The first photo is Walter in his Spurs kit. The second photo is White Hart Lane ground with the White Hart Public House on the immediate left. Tottenham on tour. In May 1909, Walter toured Argentina with Uruguay with Spurs. It took weeks to sail from England to South America, and the team trained by running round the deck. It was tough playing in South America because it was so hot, and Walter wrote home to his friends saying he had got sunstroke. Even so, Walter had great success on the tour, playing at centre forward for Tottenham and scoring against Everton in a 2-2 draw. He even got a mention in the Buenos Aires Herald, which said his play made him a great favourite with the crowd. He'd certainly come a long way from playing for the children's home team in East London. Tough times. Back home, Walter was soon making an impact at Spurs, winning a penalty against Manchester United in a 2-2 draw in front of £32,000. He scored his first goal for Spurs at Bradford City in a 5-1 defeat 2 weeks after making his debut, but soon afterwards his experience at Tottenham turned sour. Walter was chosen to play at Ashton Gate against Bristol City on October 2nd, 1909, in front of £20,000. Early in the second half, Walter was involved in an incident with a Bristol player, and when the referee waved play on, the Bristol supporters were so angry they shouted abuse and made racist comments about Walter. Walter was described in the match report as the best forward on the field, and in a class superior to that shown by most of his colleagues. The directors of Tottenham retired Walter from the first team to stop racist abuse in future games, only playing him 3 more times. Walter was obviously a very talented player, and the directors once again took the easy way out and showed no backbone at all. I will now explain why the manager didn't make the final decision. Background on the dreadful decision regarding Walter Tull. John Cameron was player, then secretary manager of Tottenham from 1899 to 1907. He resigned in 1907, citing differences with the directorate. Spurs immediately advertised the position and had many applicants, well-known managers and players throwing their hats in the ring. Unbelievably, the directors employed Fred Kirkham, a commercial traveller and referee, on a 5-year contract at £350 a year. Fred Kirkham officiated in the FA Cup finals of 1902 and 1906 and several international matches, but he had no qualifications whatever to be manager of the football club. Mac William had been a great player with Newcastle, winning 3 league titles and reaching 4 FA Cup finals between 1905 and 1910. He survived from April 1907 until July 1908 after introducing afternoon training in addition to morning training, which did not create harmony in the squad. At the AGM on July 20th, 1908, Kirkham handed in his resignation and Chairman Charles Roberts expressed the hope that Fred would obtain a job in the commercial world such as he was used to in the 17 years prior to joining Spurs. Following Fred's departure, the directors made another astute decision, touch of sarcasm there, by deciding to take over the manager's duties themselves. The situation would continue until Spurs were fortunate enough to sign Peter McWilliam as manager in 1912, who held the job until 1927. The Cobblers to the rescue. Former Spurs player Herbert Chapman, manager of 2nd Division Northampton Town, was looking for a new left-footed centre-forward to join his team. He'd heard there was a skillful player in the reserves at Spurs, and Walter was transferred to Northampton in October 1911, reportedly costing a heavy transfer fee. Northampton was very different to the East End of London. Fewer dirty, smelly factories and more green fields. Walter is far left on the back row. Walter moved to a small town called Rushden, where he rented a room. He was still in close contact with his brother, and Edward even travelled from Glasgow to watch him play. Immediate success. Walter made his debut against Watford in front of 5,000 fans. He soon made his mark when he scored 6 goals in 3 games, 4 of them against Bristol Rovers. The newspapers reported that he was a favourite with the crowd. He wasn't subjected to the kind of racial abuse he'd experienced at Tottenham. He was a gifted athlete playing cricket for Rushden Town during the summer season. At the end of the season, Walter was moved to the midfield, where he linked attack and defence and played more than 100 games for Northampton Town. Although Walter had a successful career, he missed his family, and in 1914 he made plans to move to Glasgow Rangers to be reunited with his brother Edward. However, Walter never made it to Glasgow, as we will discover. War breaks out. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, Bosnia, in Eastern Europe. 3 months later, after the German army attacked Belgium, Britain declared war on Germany. Walter was released from his contract with Northampton Town to enlist in the army. He chose to join the Footballers' Battalion of the Middlesex Regiment. Walter was sent to northern France in December 1915, and being an excellent soldier, he'd already been promoted 3 times to Lance Sergeant. During May 1916, he was sent to hospital in England to recover from shell shock. The Battle of the Somme. Walter recovered and arrived back in France on September 20th, 1916, receiving orders to go to the Somme on October 29th, 1916. On July 1st, 1916, one of the most important battles of the First World War began on the Somme. British generals were confident of a quick victory, but were wrong. Soldiers had to walk through an area called No Man's Land, a strip of land that separated the Allies from the Germans. Walter had to dodge machine gun bullets and barbed wire, deep trenches made from exploding shells, and the bodies of soldiers who had paid the ultimate price. no man's land. On the very first day of the battle, there were over 50,000 British soldiers killed and wounded. After 3 weeks of fighting at the Somme, Walter and the rest of the Middlesex Regiment were ordered to the rear for a well-deserved break from the fighting. The Battle of the Somme lasted for 5 months, and hundreds of thousands of men on both sides were killed. By the time the battle was over, in November 1916, over 1.5 million men had been killed or wounded. Of the 400 men of Walter's Middlesex Regiment who went to fight, only 79 returned. Officer class. Walter arrived back in England on Boxing Day 1916 for his first leave since joining the army. Walter had been recommended by Lieutenant Colonel Haig Brown for officer training in Scotland. Walter's inclusion on the course showed a significant change in attitude towards black people in the army, even though this was not officially recognised. You can almost see the relief on the faces of soldiers in the photo, who were so glad to be back home on leave. Training course. During 4 months of training, Walter learned how to command men, how to attack and defend against the enemy, how to read maps and how to throw grenades and build trenches. The trainees were given manuals that covered in great detail all the different scenarios they would have to deal with. This ranged from setting up a machine gun post to using pigeons to send secret messages. Every trainee had to know everything in the manual, as well as demonstrating initiative, leadership, and a great deal of self-confidence. He took his exams at the end of May and graduated on May 29, 1917. Return to France. Walter returned to France in August 1917 and rejoined the Middlesex Regiment, where he was given his first group of soldiers to command. Walter used his football experience to make sure his men became part of a team, one where men looked out for each other in battle. The first major battle that Walter Tull led his men into was known as Passchendaele in Belgium in June 1917. It was marshland. The weather was cold and wet, turning the land into a mud bath. Many soldiers and horses drowned when they fell into deep holes made by shells. When the battle ended in November 1917, only 5 miles of land had been won, and over 200,000 Allied soldiers had been killed, the equivalent to 2 inches for every soldier who died. Walter wrote to his brother Edward saying he was lucky to escape injury as the Germans bombed them relentlessly and he had to dodge from trench to trench to keep his men safe. A spying mission. After surviving Passchendaele, the Middlesex Regiment was moved to northern Italy to fight the Germans and Austrians. Instead of fighting in trenches, the soldiers lived in woods, with the River Piave flowing between the British and the enemy. Dangerous missions were undertaken to cross the river to spy on the enemy. On Christmas Eve 1917, Walter led a small group of men on a mission to cross a bridge over the Piave in the middle of the night to gain information. Walter and his men completed the mission and returned with vital information about the enemy. On New Year's Eve, Walter again led his men across the fast-flowing Piave, but this time he had to attack the enemy, capture any prisoners, and hold their position so another bridge could be built behind them. When he returned without losing a single man, he was praised by his commanding officer, Major General Sidney Lawford, for his gallantry and coolness, and recommended for the Military Cross for his bravery. Walter never received his military cross. Death of a hero. After his success in Italy, Walter was transferred back to France. In March 1918, the Second Battle of the Somme began, and Walter and his men were moved to a small town called Favre. On the morning of March 25th, the Germans began to bomb the front line and launched their attack on the British trenches. As Walter was commanding his men, a machine gun bullet hit him in the neck, killing him instantly. The painting depicts Walter's tragic death. His friend, Private Tom Billingham, the Leicester Fosse goalkeeper, made an heroic attempt to rescue Walter's body, but under heavy fire he returned empty-handed. Walter's body was left on the battlefield of the Somme, and it was never found. The King's Telegram. On April 17, 1918, a telegram arrived at 419 St Vincent Street in Glasgow, the home of Edward Tull, informing him of Walter's death. Edward said later it was the worst moment of his life. In a letter written to Edward in April 1918, Walter's commanding officer, Major Poole, wrote that Walter was very cool in moments of danger and always volunteered for any enterprise that might be of service. His courage was of the highest order and was combined with a quiet and unassuming manner. The telegram reads, "The King and Queen deeply regret the loss you, the army, have received by the death of Second Lieutenant Walter Tull in the service of his country. Their Majesties truly sympathise with you in your sorrow." And it was signed the Keeper of the Privy Purse. Remembering Walter Tull. At the end of the First World War, Walter's name was placed on the Arras Memorial, a few miles away from Favre, where he was killed. The memorial has the names of 35,000 soldiers from Britain, South Africa and New Zealand who have no grave. Walter Tull, footballer, soldier and hero. Outside Northampton Town's football stadium, at the top of a road called Walter Tull Way, is a large stone memorial. On it are carved words that were written to remember Walter Tull, footballer, officer and hero. Through his actions, W.D.J. Tull ridiculed the barriers of ignorance that tried to deny people of colour equality with their contemporaries. His life stands testament to a determination to confront these people and those obstacles that sought to diminish him and the world in which he lived. It reveals a man, though rendered breathless in his prime, whose strong heart still beats loudly. This memorial marks an area of reflective space as a garden of remembrance. Memorials to Walter Tull. Apart from the memorials at Arras and Northampton, many more are scattered around the country. On October 21st, 2014, a blue plaque was unveiled at 77 Northumberland Park, London North 17, close to White Hart Lane, by Garth Cruz, who called him an amazing man, whose recognition had been a long time coming, 96 years after he died. Spurs should be utterly ashamed. On March 25th, 2018, a blue plaque was unveiled at 28 Queen Street, Rushden, on the centenary of his death, where he lodged. Walter is also named on the Folkestone War Memorial and the Dover War Memorial. The Royal Mint included a £5 coin honouring Walter in a 6-coin set released in 2014. Will Walter Tull ever receive the justice his actions deserve? Walter's superior officers informed Edward Tull, and in doing so broke army regulations, that Walter had been recommended for the Military Cross for his actions in Italy, but to no avail. The Military Cross was denied. Over 100 years later, the wish to formally acknowledge Tull's sacrifice persists. He never received his MC because the bar and black soldiers becoming officers meant the top brass did not recognise his actions in the field. Official resistance lingers on, however, with the Ministry of Defence citing as justification, to me that's an excuse, that Tull cannot be a special case. Whatever form increased exposure takes, it will serve to make more people aware of Walter's astonishing life and perhaps help earn official recognition for a man who had an impact not just on football, but society as a whole. We see every year people being knighted for performing some act which is insignificant, like scoring goals or winning Formula 1 races. But Walter Daniel John Tull gave his life